So I've done it yet again. I've added another part to this series that was originally intended to only be one video. But there's just... Jesus Christ, why?
Yet another video essay ruined by the notorious Very Long Man. Oh, Lord. It's Very Cool Gal, here to derail my plans yet again with her comfortable but stylish hoodies in sizes XS to 3XL.
It's time for my special attack. Green screen fusion! Hurrah!
Which side are you on? Represent your team with the corporate turtleneck, the very long hoodie, or a number of other tops, pants, and accessories from today's sponsor, Cool Shirts. Use the link in my description and code LeeSpeaks for 10% off your order.
Please get on my goddamn video. Leave!
Thank you, Cool Shirts, for sponsoring today's video. So there are a few things that made me want to highlight VMK on its own, separate from the other Disney virtual worlds. First, it has the unique distinction of being a runaway success when it was really never intended to be anything like that. The fact that it stuck around for so many years and got so popular was a complete fluke. VMK also has a remarkable post-closure history of spin-offs and fan recreations, several of which still exist today. And, well, virtual world rewritten projects contain internal drama pretty much as a rule. However, there is something about this game that has just attracted a particularly explosive drama across the several different iterations of its rewritten projects. Let's get into it now. This is Disney's Virtual Worlds Part 2, Virtual Magic Kingdom. Once again, I would like to give a major thanks to the contributors over at disneysonlineworlds.com, because without the documentation on that website, many of the little facets of the site's history would be lost, even with the fan recreations. Definitely one of the strangest things about VMK was that it was never meant to persist. It was intentionally designed to exist for a few months and then naturally die out. The Happiest Celebration on Earth campaign, launching in May 2005, was a series of events and promotions to commemorate the 50th anniversary of Disneyland Theme Park. Virtual Magic Kingdom was designed as part of this promotion and nothing else. It was never intended to exist past the end of the campaign. This got me thinking how many of the other virtual worlds from around this time period are like this. Virtual Magic Kingdom was transparent about its intended built-in closure date, but how many of these projects simply are not meant to last? One that jumps to mind is the MMO Rango with a World. Yes, there was a virtual world game for the 2011 animated Western Rango, released around the same time as the film's United States premiere, and I think it's very safe to assume that there is no way in hell this game is meant to run past the duration of the film's run in theaters. Rango the World came and went with extremely little fuss. So little that I wasn't able to figure out how long the game existed because nobody was posting about being sad that the game closed down. This was very likely the intended fate of Virtual Magic Kingdom. However, this game was imbued with just enough of that magically addictive Disney fairy dust to be a runaway hit and continue for years past its originally intended closure date. From a cynical business perspective, it's absurd to think that these virtual worlds will last forever. Even websites that were intended to endure for longer than a few years, well, interests in IPs come and go, and I'm sure that once the novelty of the concept wore off, investors realized that this was a bubble and were eager to abandon ship as soon as profits began to wane. You don't tend to consider these things when you're a kid. Until the closure is announced and therefore inevitable and imminent, you just accept these websites as facts of life. It's not a pressing concern at the time whether you'll still be playing the game in 1 year or even in 1 week. They're largely taken for granted until suddenly you don't have access anymore. Virtual Magic Kingdom, as its name implies, was created to simulate the experience of visiting the Disney parks, but in a limited digital form. The game wasn't meant to represent one specific Disney park, but rather a fantasy amalgamation of the concept of Disney parks in general. This results in some areas being fairly direct representations of real-life areas in the Disney parks, while others are very cartoonish reimaginings. It makes sense if really all you can do is view this virtual park from the detached vantage point of a screen, might as well elevate the experience with some things that can't exist in real life. The game was developed by Sulake, a Finnish video game developer primarily known for its titles Hotel Hideaway and Habbo. So, in a glorious act of questionable decision-making, somebody at Disney saw what Habbo Hotel was doing in the early 2000s and said, "Yep, we need a piece of this." And so they partnered up to create a virtual world to promote this 50th anniversary celebration. The game's alpha build was tested by Walt Disney Parks and Resorts Online, a section of the Disney Corporation responsible for building and maintaining the websites associated with the Disney resorts and theme parks. The pre-beta testing began on the 1st of May 2005 and lasted until the start of open beta on May 23rd. The first day that the game was in open beta, VMK amassed about 500 new members. This initial public release included the area's Main Street, Fantasyland, and Adventureland, and the game's Pirates of the Caribbean, Jungle Cruise, Castle Fireworks, and Street Party music game. Virtual Magic Kingdom had its official public release about a month later on June 27, 2005. Players who were present on this day or earlier received a special badge, here from day one. Let's take a look at what this game had to offer. I'll be using two of the rewritten versions, VMK Legacy and MyVMK, to describe the layout of this game. Both of these games are a bit underpopulated, at least in early 2023 when this was written, which has the plus side of being more ideal for seeing the unobstructed graphics. VMK Legacy is more visually similar to the original VMK, but MyVMK is more complete, so Legacy will provide the bulk of the visuals while MyVMK will fill in for the games and missing rooms. Let's start with the basic controls. You move around these environments by clicking around the room. If the floor panel is highlighted green, you'll walk there. If it says exit, you'll move to a different room, and if it turns into a yellow arrow, you'll sit. At the bottom is a chat bar. The VMK dictionary, or their whitelist word bank system, limits the words you're allowed to use. To the right of the chat bar is magic, which are special interactions and animations that you can unlock with gameplay. You do not have any magic when you first start. The globe icon on the bottom left takes you to the map, which allows you to effortlessly fast travel to most locations in the park. The I button next to that gives you specific information about the room you're in. Next to that is your inventory page, which allows you to view your amount of credits, as well as furniture, pins, clothes, and posters. Next to that is Mail, which is for communications from the game and direct messages between friends. Then Shop, which is a menu that you'll have to fill out by visiting the various shops scattered throughout the park. The Q button stands for Quests, which also require you to be in specific rooms to activate. On the other side of this bottom menu is the Camera, which allows you to take a picture of your avatar so long as you have film. The Dress Up menu, and finally Settings and Help. Now, allow me to walk you through the 5 main parks of Virtual Magic Kingdom. First, let's have a look at Main Street, USA. You begin in the Esplanade, a wide, brick-paved gathering space, meant to represent a transitional space between the different areas. You can see the iconic Disney attractions in the distance. You can access 3 rooms from the Esplanade. First, the Sci-Fi Dine-In, which in the original VMK was used to promote Disney movies that were currently in theaters. Then there's the monorail boarding platform, at which a monorail will periodically arrive. You can board to access a music-making minigame and travel throughout the park. Finally, there's Main Street proper. First, you arrive at Town Square, where off to the side you can enter the first shop, the Emporium. Inside the shop, you can meet one of the NPCs, Esmeralda the Fortune Teller. Like many of the NPCs, Esmeralda is based on a real Disney automaton. Past Town Square is the section of Main Street that contains the Penny Arcade and VMK Central. The Penny Arcade is loaded with arcade machines, but at least in the rewritten versions, none of them seem to be interactive. This screenshot from VMK after an update in early 2008 seems to imply that this room once held minigames. Next is VMK Central, which represented the real-life Main Street cinema that at the time was being used to host Virtual Magic Kingdom's Disney Park tie-ins. Apparently, this used to be the room where you could buy a camera. This has been moved to the Magic Shop in MyVMK and has yet to be implemented in VMK Legacy. The next place in this area is the Magic Shop, which sold some magic-themed items and has a multiplayer checkers game in the back room. Several of the features in both of the available rewritten projects are implied to be interactive, but aren't. Many of these more peripheral details are presumably lost. If anybody sat down in the opposite seat here, this would probably start a game of checkers, but, well... A little beyond these rooms is the Street Party music game lobby, which has 2 special interactions. First is the track mixer, which allows you to make your own custom music track out of a selection of sounds, represented by various shapes in the audio timeline. Something extremely frustrating about these sounds is that there's so much variation in tempo and music style in these instrument samples that you can't really mesh them together elegantly. Trying to be creative will almost inevitably end up with a horribly messy sounding track. There's also a very noticeable, distracting silence between the loops. After you make one of these, you can play it at the DJ turntables to receive some credits. Returning to Main Street, there's the Central Plaza, which allows you to travel to Adventureland and Tomorrowland, and finally the Castle Forecourt, which holds the gateways to Fantasyland and Frontierland. Let's move on to Fantasyland, which depicts a fantastical imagining of the Sleeping Beauty Castle, with Maleficent's tower looming ominously beside it. You can enter both, but for now let's go through the castle route. First, you enter the gallery of the Sleeping Beauty Castle with a single person slumbering inside. If you exit through the middle room, you'll enter the banquet hall with several people sleeping at the tables. Leaving through the other side of this room will cause you to leave Fantasyland, so let's backtrack and go up the left of the gallery to the Castle Fireworks Remixed game. To play, you have to match the icons appearing on the screen with your mouse, changing shapes with the arrow keys. You get more points if you match the shape at the highest point in the arc, but it will quickly disappear after reaching this point. This game has a few issues, at least if you're right-handed like I am. You either have to awkwardly cross your hands over the keyboard or control your mouse with your non-dominant hand. The shapes are also very small, and their hitboxes are unforgiving. It's a bit fun after you get the hang of it, though. Taking the spooky route at the castle entrance will lead you to the dungeon, which is largely taken up by the NPC Maleficent the Dragon. Leaving the castle, the other entrance to Fantasyland available from Main Street is the courtyard. VMK, attempting to emulate a real theme park experience, has some rides. Here, you can board Peter Pan's Flight, in which you just view your avatar inching their way through this isometric room full of Peter Pan-themed items. While I couldn't say I'm overly impressed with this feature, you can buy the items to make your own dark ride using the furnishings for sale at the various stores, which is pretty neat. Past the courtyard is Storybook Land, a cozy pastoral miniature village playing a gentle music box rendition of My Grandfather's Clock while this ungodly whale stares through you. Passing through the mineshaft will have you emerge in the Snow White hide-and-seek forest. I think the hide-and-seek aspect just refers to hiding your player behind the various elements in the room, which there are really only these trees back there. Another room accessible from Storybook Land is It's a Small World Imports, Fantasyland shop. If you climb the beanstalk in Storybook Land, you arrive at Fantasyland in the sky, a space where you can walk on the clouds. Taking the rainbow towards the Snowy Mountain will lead you to the final Fantasyland location, the Matterhorn, where you can meet the Yeti NPC. Hey, this place is looking very cool. Since this one's attached to Fantasyland, let's explore Frontierland next. The entrance is the Frontierland Hub, which lets you travel to a few different locations. This area's shop is the Golden Horseshoe Mercantile, which is stocked with old Western-themed items. On the bottom left corner is the Haunted Mansion, which counts as part of New Orleans Square instead of Frontierland. Returning to the Frontierland Hub, you can continue on to the docks and board the Mark Twain riverboat from there. This boat seems to be a lecture-style social room, and if you stand at the podium, your avatar would be displayed on screen. To the bottom right, you can go to Big Thunder Mountain, where you can enter a series of caves. The first is tactfully renamed in MyVMK to Frontierland Cave, an improvement over the Disney-typical whimsical racism of naming the feature after Injun Joe, an antagonistic character from Tom Sawyer stated to be evil specifically due to his Indian blood. Disney kept this feature intact in their real-life Magic Kingdom parks until 2022. The next part of the Twisting Cave is the Big Thunder Mountain Cave. There aren't any specific tasks that I'm aware of here besides exploring and figure out where the exits lead. The other branch leading off the Frontierland dock is Tom Sawyer Island. The Disney Online Worlds Wiki and VMK Legacy both include this line at the end of their description of this area. Just remember that normal VMK rules don't apply here. What? I truly can't tell if this was just a joke or if this room actually had less rule enforcement. Either way, that just seems like asking for trouble. MyVMK omits this line. To get any further than the bottom level, you'll need to come out through the correct cave exit. Beyond Tom Sawyer Island is Splash Mountain, which isn't a working feature in either VMK Legacy or MyVMK. Disney's Online Worlds describes it as a game where players could build and ride custom flume ride designs and share them with other players. I wasn't able to find any documentation of this feature. Let's move on to Adventureland. You start out in the Adventureland Bazaar, a hub for several different locations. First, there's VMK's most popular multiplayer minigame, Pirates of the Caribbean. Repeatedly playing this minigame was the most popular method of grinding for currency. Pirates of the Caribbean has two game modes, Ship Battle and Capture the Flag. Nobody wanted to play this game with me on MyVMK, and I can't be bothered to figure out how it works without any direct access to the game. So, moving on. To the left of the lobby is a room not mentioned on the map, the Pirate Treasure Room. Back at the bazaar again, our next exit is the Jungle Cruise game lobby, which is a photography game where you click the animals to take a picture of them as they spawn. This game is narrated by the NPC Shrunken Ned. Speaking of him, next door is Shrunken Ned's shop, Adventureland's designated shopping area. The southern path in the bazaar leads to the Pirate Treehouse, where you can visit the NPC Captain Blackheart. The path next to this leads to Discovery Island, a room with a docked ship and a Kellogg's tie-in game. As far as I can tell, this room is a dead end. Next is the Lost Safari Party room, which is a mostly featureless hallway of a room with a rhino antagonizing a group of safari goers. Past that is the Explorer's Tent, which is also pretty narrow and featureless. Past this is the Forbidden Temple. Inside the skull is this area's hidden monorail station. Next is a room themed after the Enchanted Tiki Room ride. However, there doesn't seem to be any actual ride feature included here. South of this is the Elephant Bathing Pool, a small but admittedly extremely serene room with a river, waterfall, and fewer elephants than expected. Let's move on to Tomorrowland. They take the most creative liberties with the setting here, considering we are now literally in space. The 3 teleportation pods by the entrance actually don't lead to places within Tomorrowland. The first leads to the Matterhorn in Fantasyland, the second to the Emporium on Main Street, and the third to the monorail station. Approaching the array of screens in the room will open the Tomorrowland arcade, which includes 3 games. First is Airlock Escape, a puzzle game where you place a limited amount of arrows on a grid to guide your character first to the key and then out the door. The other 2 games were Blast in Space and Hyperspace Mountain, but neither of these would load. The exit in the southern portion of the room is to Space Mountain Quest Deck, which served as the initiation point for the adventures through Inner Space Quest. Next is the Inner Space Shrinking Machine room. Green tiles along the floor here indicate that I ought to be able to do some spacewalking, but I wasn't able to figure out how to get over there. Navigating in VMK's Tomorrowland is a challenge. I stopped trying to figure out how the rooms are interconnected and just fast-traveled using the map for the most part. This leads me to a series of Autopia-themed rooms, the Quest Track, Space Race, and Off-Road Mars. All 3 of these rooms require the Quest Autopia trip around VMK for full access. Down the elevator is the Captain's Quest Quarters, which is the Quest initiation point for the Quest ships and shipwrecks, which allow you diving access to the final 2 rooms in Tomorrowland, the Nautilus Grotto and Shipwreck Graveyard. Tomorrowland is definitely the most exclusive area within VMK due to all the gameplay locked areas. This area had 2 rooms that required too much gameplay for me to justify unlocking, which are the Inner Space Ray room featuring an alarming giant eyeball, and Tomorrowland's Inner Space Shop, the only shop that counts as a secret room. Finally is the last and smallest area of the park, New Orleans Square. All 3 of the associated rooms are accessible through the main hub. First, there's the Haunted Mansion, which contains a multiplayer ghost hunting game. Entering the green door will take you further into the mansion, beginning with the stretching room, and then into the ballroom, and finally the attic, which contains a hidden monorail station. I have to say, the sound design for this game tends to be very creepy. It makes sense for there to be creepy sound effects in this room, it is a haunted mansion after all, but the repeated torture screams are just alarming. This doesn't just apply to the Haunted Mansion, but non-spooky themed areas throughout the park as well. Middle of the 3 rooms is the VMK Gallery, which is described as hosting concept art for upcoming features and rare pieces of furniture. Finally, there's the Blue Bayou, which is a restaurant featuring the NPC Gator Waiter. I thought that all of these NPCs were meant to represent real things within Disney parks, but no, to my disappointment, it seems that Gator Waiter lived and died with this game. These game stations placed throughout the world really appear like they're supposed to be interactive, but they aren't in either of the rewritten versions. The unfortunate fact of the matter is that there's very little that I can do to capture an extremely important facet of this game. You may have noticed that while I've been showing you all this, a strong reason to actually play the game is largely absent. There are some games, but not a lot, and several require other players, a matter where you're probably out of luck. So what else? What's the real draw here? Well, it was other people. VMK was an extremely socially oriented game, so much so that the site actually imposed operating hours from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. PSD in order to handle the moderation demand. VMK is pretty well preserved as far as lost virtual worlds go, but the social aspect is difficult to preserve and is more or less lost in the current day. The closest thing we have to a time capsule of the social culture on VMK were the VMK forums, which were shuttered with the mass closure of Disney's virtual worlds in 2013. The forums remain up but are now read-only. The simple, sad reality is that the virtual world bubble has burst, and even though we have these recreated versions of the game, without an earnestly participating player base, it's a shell of what it used to be. As VMK forums user The Phoenix succinctly puts it, VMK never had any magic. We were the ones that had it. Now, you may have noticed, in my description of this game, I've mentioned no subscriptions, no microtransactions, no paid element at all. This is because VMK was ostensibly a 100% free-to-play game. However, leave it to Disney to create a virtual world with basically no paywall at all, and simultaneously the biggest, most inaccessible paywall possible. Virtual Magic Kingdom, as its name implies, was first and foremost an advertisement for the parks themselves. As such, they used a unique marketing tactic that really only a brand as ubiquitous as Disney would be able to get away with. By visiting in-person kiosks in the Disney parks, players would receive coveted special items. That's right, no subscription, no microtransactions, but if you want something better than a lame, basic bitch avatar, you'll have to get your whole family to haul out to one of the Disney parks. This meant that the highest tier of VMK's class system were without a doubt the kids who were able to visit the Disney park several times a year. Kids who were local to the park were essentially VMK's 1%, with the yearly or rare Disney visitors the upper class, and everyone else the proletariat. This was essentially VMK's only class barrier, but one hell of a class barrier it was. The real-world park integrations were known as in-park quests, which could then be exchanged for cards with a redeemable code for an item. For example, you get golden Mickey ears for buying a hat in real life, or a Mickey shirt in-game for buying a t-shirt in real life. In this game, moderators were referred to as cast members. As I mentioned previously, to combat traffic and behavior issues, hours of operation were restricted to daytime in California, which severely limited the site's global reach. However, as we'll discuss soon, Disney didn't necessarily see increased traffic to VMK as a good thing. Similar but distinct from cast members were hosts, which were VMK staff with the role of organizing and hosting social events. These events had a variety of themes with titles like Don't Break the Ice, Yeti Training Camp, and Ask the Host. It's safe to assume that the majority of these events were group games. Players could attain the status of community leader by sending in an application via email. To qualify, you had to be an active user and have an account in good standing. Being banned would result in your community leader status being revoked. Community leader was essentially an honorary position with no special privileges besides a CL badge next to your avatar. Developers had their own Disneyfied moniker, going by producers in this game. There seems to be one particularly notable producer named Yavin. Yavin acted as the mouthpiece of the dev team and provided announcements in his own column in the VMK newsletter, Yavin Speaks. Yavin would be the one to most frequently appear in the virtual park itself and would sometimes give tours. Much of VMK's user base was fixated on collecting pins. Pins could be attached to your player profile and would sometimes come with a magic effect. Much of the pin economy was based on artificial scarcity, with pins typically being offered for a short amount of time before being replaced with something else. Despite pins having a fairly minimal effect on gameplay overall, they were a pillar of the economy in both VMK and the recreated versions. By the time the website closed, there were 231 pins available to collect. Users were able to trade their items with other users, which became the core of VMK's virtual economy. VMK's item trading mechanic, like most games with this type of interaction, were vulnerable to the antics of young scammers. Disney's Online Worlds describes a few common trading scam methods, including claiming to be trading invisible furniture, quickly removing items from the trade box right before the opposite player clicks accept, asking to borrow items, and claiming common items are rare items in disguise. One level above pins were badges, which couldn't be traded but acted similarly as a status symbol in the game. There were 5 possible badges: the Born in Park badge given to players whose player characters were created within a Disney park, VIP given to players who completed an in-park quest, Here from Day 1 given to people who were present at public release Day 1, and finally badges for community leaders and staff. Another major feature that I've yet to mention are the guest rooms. These make up the interior design gameplay aspect and are capable of some pretty advanced layouts, including rides. Having a cool room was a major manifestation of the Disney in-park quest paywall, since the vast majority of the unlockable items were furniture. Guest rooms could be made more exclusive by making players use tickets to enter. Tickets would be worn in a pin slot and could only be distributed by the room's owner. Players were also able to create their own quests so long as they had a quest kiosk. You could populate the quest with a variety of tasks, like playing a minigame, finding an item, or saying a specific word in chat. The prizes given out by these quests could be anything so long as the creator could afford it. To combat server capacity limitations, MyVMK had a fast pass queuing system similar to the ones in real-life parks. When a room becomes full, players get the option to get a VMK pass. Instead of getting a specified time to return in the future, the VMK fast pass held your place in line, and once the queue counter hit 0, you had 20 seconds to hit enter room or lose your opportunity. Virtual Magic Kingdom's users persisted happily for years, grinding for credits, collecting items, trading pins, and just generally existing as an online social gathering point. All seemed well, but as soon as the Happiest Celebration on Earth campaign was over, the clock was ticking. In the spring of 2008, VMK had already overstayed its welcome for several years. The closure was announced in the VMK newsletter on April 7th. In a follow-up Yavin Speaks column, he states the following: "Please know that the decision to close VMK was not made without a great deal of thought and discussion, because we loved creating VMK just as much as you loved playing it. We considered many options prior to closing, but ultimately determined that VMK had accomplished its goal and then some. VMK was a valuable part of the Disneyland 50th celebration, but it was never meant to live on forever. It's now time to focus our resources on our new virtual worlds." An element that made VMK a huge hit among its player base was the fact that it was free to play. No subscription or microtransaction elements were ever introduced, even late in the game's history. The only way VMK was ever intended to monetize was through being an advertisement for the Disney parks. And that is a far harder sell for a parent than a subscription or a one-time payment. Disney had accidentally created a potent competitor to itself. The built-in advertisement for the Disney parks was not enough to stop VMK from becoming a money pit, and this issue would scale in relation to how popular the game became. If you're not already local to the park, there's really only so much that a virtual theme park can do to convince a family to spend a few days in Ks at one of the real-life ones. Therefore, VMK, with its unlimited free gameplay, accidentally became a parasite to the player bases of the other Disney virtual worlds that were optimized to make money, like Toontown and Club Penguin. VMK's efficacy as an advertisement for the Disney parks waned significantly after the end of the Happiest Celebration on Earth campaign. Months worth of limited time events and crowd gathering new releases were a pretty effective bait in tandem with this virtual world experience, but after the 50th anniversary celebration passed, the virtual world meant to advertise it did not. VMK's closure events were essentially a series of desperate attempts to point players towards Disney's more lucrative virtual worlds, namely Toontown, Club Penguin, and Pirates of the Caribbean Online. The closure of VMK prompted a massive outcry among the loyal players. The subforum Save VMK was created on the VMK forums, and may have ultimately planted the seeds for the fan recreations that would start appearing in the following years. One of these post-original games is a bit of an anomaly. When I talk about the games that come after these original virtual worlds, I'm usually talking about the realm of fan recreations. But this one's kind of a special case, and that is Virtual Family Kingdom, or VFK. It opened in 2008, around exactly the same time as the closure of VMK, and, well, in my opinion, this one is a bit of a bootleg. This one isn't so much a copy of the original VMK as a different game entirely intended to replace VMK. Instead of representing a virtual park, in VFK you explore representations of various ages, fantasy realms, and Australia. The fast travel in this game can really barely be called that because it requires you to very slowly walk across the map to the title of the place you want to go. There's a currently active browser and downloadable version, although the browser requires Flash. I was hoping that the downloadable version would run a little better, but unfortunately the improvement is negligible. This one's just not a very well-built virtual world, and although surviving until 2023 is a commendable effort, I'm not compelled to keep playing this. Let's move on to the actual recreations of Virtual Magic Kingdom, beginning with the original VMK remake, OpenVMK. OpenVMK, as one of the original players in the Rewritten project space, suffered some growing pains that would make it ultimately unsustainable. The lead programmer describes the opening day as painfully underprepared with zero moderation capabilities. This did eventually improve, but not enough to save the project in the long run. OpenVMK had a tortured existence and was plagued by internal drama and not having enough volunteers with relevant skills. The existence of this project mostly hinged on the contributions of one person, the lead programmer. The instability within the project's dev team ultimately resulted in this programmer unaffiliating with the project in a very public way that initiated a mass exodus of OpenVMK users toward their new project, which I'll talk about very soon. 3 years after its closure, it was announced that OpenVMK suffered a data breach due to inadequate password storage, so that also wasn't great. RIP OpenVMK. You were always a mess. There was one other rumored VMK remake that I could find, VMK Unleashed, but this seems to have never come to fruition besides for a few promotional pages. Now let's talk about the direct recreations that still exist. First, let's discuss the older of the two active options, MyVMK. Originally named My Mystical Kingdom, this one is easily the largest and most prolific of the VMK remakes. This is the project that spawned from the dissolution of OpenVMK. MyVMK was created to be an active, evolving VMK experience, as though the game was never discontinued. Therefore, MyVMK also has a few map additions compared to the original. The Epcot edition is a simple two-room social space, one with Spaceship Earth and the other with two storefronts reading The Art of Disney and Mouse Gear, but neither seem available to enter. A more complete edition is Animal Kingdom. I think there's a pretty commendable effort to emulate the art style of VMK in these new areas, because it wasn't immediately apparent to me that this area was a fan-made addition. This space has a safari ride, a gibbon habitat, an entrance to Expedition Everest that doesn't seem to have an associated ride, and a few plain social spaces themed after the vague theme park conception of the continents of Asia and Africa. This area has its own shop, the Discovery Trading Company. This area, labeled DCA for Disney California Adventure, is an extremely incomplete location with a single-room Pixar Pier, with two implied but inaccessible doors to Lamplight Lounge and Nick's Knacks. Finally, there's the World Showcase with individual rooms from Mexico, Norway, China, Germany, Italy, America, Japan, France, Morocco, United Kingdom, and Canada. Each of these rooms have a quest that you can complete to earn a passport stamp. MyVMK also adds some new games. It's unclear whether there's any plans for expansion or if these new areas will remain incomplete. So, when I visit MyVMK today, I mostly see no people, and when there are others, they're not interacting, or interacting exclusively with each other. If you've been on, well, just about any currently active nostalgic virtual world, this shouldn't come as a surprise. However, I can say with confidence that this is an improvement to when the game was experiencing peak popularity in the mid-10s. Now, before I begin this part, I would like to just say that a virtual world rewritten project is a huge and noble effort. It takes work, dedication, planning, and a lot of ingenuity. And people are doing this for free. That is incredible, and that is worthy of respect. Also, a lot of these things were problems that mostly existed over half a decade ago and have largely fizzled out due to the bulk of the player base moving on with their lives and going inactive. So, with all that made clear, MyVMK is a pretty good case study in what happens when you take a previously for kids virtual world and turn it into a private server with a much more lax degree of moderation than the original. Judging from forum posts around this time period, MyVMK used to be a bit of a hole as far as the social culture was concerned. It's kind of hard to avoid seeing stuff about this. A very large portion of the discussion about the game are complaints about how awful and toxic the community is, as well as complaints about the staff being apathetic towards or even enabling inappropriate player behavior. The MyVMK forums from around that time are a mess of call-out posts, personal testimonies of poor treatment from other users and staff, apologies from said staff, and it's a lot. A repeated criticism of this area of the user base was that it felt like a bunch of 20-somethings role-playing as mean high school kids, and yeah, that doesn't seem too off base, especially because the nature of this drama is described as extremely cliquey. I personally didn't witness any unseemly behavior during my play sessions, which does give me the impression that this toxic player base has mostly fizzled out, if only due to inactivity. However, I've seen posts complaining about toxic and rule-breaking player behavior from as recently as 2022, so it's pretty clear to me that MyVMK has had trouble managing this negative reputation. So what can MyVMK teach us about the best practices of running a rewritten game? Well, I think the most important lesson is that failure to keep dev drama contained within the people it directly affects is a quick and easy way to poison your community. And second, it's generally a much safer choice to keep the moderation system more or less exactly the same as the original. While this is stifling, think about the expected social atmosphere in a game with zero social moderation, like a standard voice chat in a first-person shooter game. The fact of the matter is, a lot of safeguards have to be put in place to stop people from feeling like they're able to act as awful as they want, and this applies to adults as much as it applies to kids. Without that, things become very messy in a hurry. This is therefore an official retraction of something I said in my Barbie Girls video essay. You guys over at Barbie Girls Rewritten should keep that obnoxious censorship system exactly as it was. Toontown Rewritten is a solid counterexample for both of these issues. TTR is very careful about enforcing the game's original moderation standards and keeping their internal drama, well, internal. This results in a much lower degree of community negativity, with their main problems being tryhardism and griefing and not just outright cyberbullying. Even though this issue is mostly in the past, I would just like to give a gentle warning to anyone who would like to try to play this game. If you don't already have an established account with rare items, you're really not likely to get any anytime soon, and the people who are still playing generally don't want to play with you because new accounts have nothing to offer, and many of these older players don't want to bother with people who aren't familiar with the minigame controls. While you're much less likely to run into trolling or rude behavior here now, there's clearly an established history of that, and this is not the squeaky clean kid-friendly experience that the original website was. So you should keep that in mind if you want to engage with this site. Ultimately, this is not a drama channel, so I'm not going to get deeper into the situation. Well, not here I'm not. But my Patreon-exclusive companion to this video, available for $5 per month, is a Get Ready With Me, where I do the makeup that I'm wearing now, and dive deep on the tumultuous history of these VMK Rewritten projects, featuring infighting, alliances, conspiracies, a popular user faking their own death. Of course, this resulted in a huge outpouring of love and support from the community, until the person whose photos they were using came forward, and more. The last VMK recreation I have to talk about is VMK Legacy, previously known as Netcot. I'm under the impression that VMK Legacy was created at least partially, if not entirely, in response to the notoriously toxic player community on MyVMK. Similar to the transition of OpenVMK to MyVMK, but without a mass exodus of one to the other. VMK Legacy's social reputation is much more neutral, and it's not as well known as MyVMK. Their level of occupancy nowadays, however, is comparable. Most of the rooms are quite empty, with little exception. Despite the missing features, there are a few things about VMK Legacy that I find preferable. First and most notably, the walking animation is much more optimized in this game compared to the very slow, halting trudge of a walk cycle in MyVMK. Second, VMK Legacy is much more newbie-friendly. MyVMK clearly has an established circle of elite regular users, obviously denoted by their fancy avatars, and you're not really likely to be able to assimilate with this group starting fresh. As far as I'm aware, the ability to even get these rare items has already passed. That or it's just highly inaccessible. VMK Legacy is much more approachable in this regard, and seems to include more avatar customization items in the shops. People playing Legacy are also much more likely to want to engage with anybody active, new user or not. However, Legacy does have the disadvantage of missing a majority of the minigames, which does severely limit how much gameplay you're able to get out of the experience. There are definitely merits to using either one of the active projects, and you may even want to use both for a complete nostalgic experience. That's all I have for today. Did you play original VMK or any of its fan recreations? Do you think they should have attempted to keep it running with a subscription, or would that have ruined the fun? Let me know what you think with a comment. If you liked this video, please go support my Patreon. For $5 a month, you can get access to the drama-focused supplement to this video, as well as an editing tutorial, my first ever video essay, and more. Thank you so much to Khan, Fishcatch, Julia, Ms. Goat, Riley Meyer, and Tara Tara. There's more Disney Virtual Worlds to come in Part 3. I'll see you all next time. Okay.